There is a costume, somewhere, that was never worn again. White feathers, sewn one by one onto pale silk, laid out and waiting in a room that was not her home, in a city she had never meant to die in. It was the middle of a winter night in the Netherlands, and the woman who had worn those feathers for 25 years, who had become that dying bird for audiences on every inhabited continent, lay in a hotel bed too weak to lift her own hand. And what she asked for, in her last hours, was not a doctor, and not her mother, and not the country she had left behind. She asked for that costume. The one thing she wanted, at the end, was to be ready to dance. Here's what you have to understand about Anna Pavlova. For most of her life, she made her living by pretending to die, night after night, on stages lit by gas and then by electric light. She folded herself down onto the boards as a wounded swan, trembling, reaching, letting the life go out of her limbs, while a cello played a slow lament behind her. People wept in the dark. They came back to weep again. She died 1,000 deaths for strangers, and each one lasted only a few minutes, and each one was so beautiful that grown men remembered it for the rest of their lives. She was rehearsing, though no one could have said so then, for a death of her own, but that ending is far away yet. To understand how a frail girl became the most famous dancer the world had ever seen, you have to go back to a cold apartment in Saint Petersburg, in the last years of the Russian Empire, where a child who was always sick lay bundled against the winter, dreaming of something she had not yet seen. The Russia she was born into was a place of enormous distances and enormous silences, of snow that came early and stayed long, and of a capital city where the very rich rode past the very poor without turning their heads. Into that city, in the winter of 1881, a small and early baby was born who was not expected to survive. She came too soon. Anna Mavyevna Pavlova was born prematurely in a regimental hospital, in the deep cold of February, and for a long time afterwards she was a thin, pale, easily frightened child who caught every fever that passed through. Her mother, Lyubov, had come from peasant stock and worked as a laundress, bent over other people's linen in the steam of other people's houses. There was not much money. There were long stretches when the child was sent out to her grandmother in a village called Ligovo, to breathe cleaner air, and there, among the birches and the quiet, the small girl grew slowly stronger, and learned to live a great deal inside her own head. The father is a question the record never quite answers. Some said he was a soldier who died young. Others, later, whispered other names, when the girl had become famous enough for men to want to claim her. What is certain is that she grew up without him, in a household of women and worry, where a warm coat mattered, and a full stove mattered, and where nothing at all suggested that this particular pale child would one day be carried through the streets of foreign cities, by crowds who could not speak her language. She was, in that apartment, only a girl who was often ill, and who watched the snow, and who waited to be well. Now, there is one night that changed everything, and it is worth slowing down for, because Anna herself pointed to it for the rest of her life as the beginning. She was 8 years old, going on 9. Her mother, who had almost nothing, had somehow found the money for 2 tickets, and she took her daughter, wrapped up against the cold, across the frozen city to the great blue and gold hall of the Mariinsky Theater. The child had never seen anything like it. The chandeliers alone, the sheer size of the room, the hush before the curtain, would have been enough. But then the music began, and the curtain rose, and Anna Pavlova saw ballet for the first time. The piece was The Sleeping Beauty, staged by the old master Marius Petipa, in all its imperial splendor, and to the girl in the cheap seats it was not a performance. It was a door opening onto a world she had somehow always known was there. Dancers crossed the stage, as if the floor did not quite hold them. Light caught the silk and the silver. The child sat forward, and forgot the cold, and forgot herself, and when it was over she turned to her mother in the great emptying hall, and said that one day she would dance on that very stage. Her mother, tired and poor, smiled the way mothers smile at impossible things. But the girl meant it. On the sleigh ride home through the dark, she was silent in a new way, a way her mother had not seen before, and something in that silence had already been decided. She did not yet know the years of pain that decision would cost her, the aching feet and the cruel classmates and the teachers who told her she was too weak. She did not know any of it. She only knew, with the whole of her small stubborn heart, that she had found the thing she was for, and in a country that gave a laundress's daughter almost nothing, she had chosen the one dream that seemed most impossible of all. So, imagine the household in the weeks that followed. A child who had been quiet and dreamy was now quiet and dreamy with a purpose. and the purpose did not fade the way children's enthusiasms usually fade. She danced in the small rooms of the apartment. She rose up onto her toes against the furniture. She begged, in the patient, relentless way of children who have decided something, to be taken to the ballet school. The famous one, the imperial school attached to the theater where all the great dancers were made. Her mother, who understood by now that this was not a passing fancy, at last agreed to take her for an audition. The first answer was no. When Anna was 9, her mother brought her before the examiners of the Imperial Ballet School, and they looked at the thin pale child with her delicate frame and her sickly color, and they told the mother, kindly enough, to bring her back when she was older and stronger. It must have stung, that no, though the girl said little about it afterward. She went home. She waited a year, which is a very long time when you are 9, and have decided your whole future. And when the year had passed, her mother, who had not given up either, brought her back to try again. This time the door opened. At 10 years old, in the year 1891, Anna Pavlova was accepted into the Imperial Ballet School, and she walked into a world of iron discipline that would shape and bruise her for the next 8 years. Here's the part most people forget about that school. It was not a place of romance. It was a kind of monastery for the body, where small children were drilled for hours, where the day was ruled by bells and mirrors and the sharp voices of teachers, and where a girl was expected to remake her own flesh into an instrument. For most children, it would have been unbearable. For this one, it was the answer to a prayer, and yet the school did not love her back, not at first. Her body, the very body that would one day make her famous, was all wrong by the standards of the day. The fashion was for compact, strong, muscular dancers who could hammer out the steps like clockwork. Anna was the opposite. She had a high, severe arch in her foot, thin ankles, long fragile limbs, a delicacy that looked less like a dancer, and more like something that might break. The other students noticed. Children always notice. And they gave her the names that children give, sharp little names meant to wound, and some of them found their mark. They called her the Broom, for her thinness, and La Petite Sauvage, the little savage. And they said, in the cruel shorthand of the young, that she would never make a real dancer. Picture her there, a 10-year-old already fighting for the one thing she wanted. Going back each morning to the mirror and the berry and the whispering. She could have folded. Many would have. Instead, something in her hardened into a quiet, unshakable resolve, and she made a decision that would define the whole of her life. She would not try to become the kind of dancer the school admired. She would take her strange, weak body and make it beautiful on its own terms. The thing is, that decision cost her more work than anyone around her was willing to do. While other students rested, she stayed at the berry. When a step defeated her, she did it again, and again, and again, until her weak ankles trembled, and the studio had emptied, and the light through the tall windows had gone gray with evening. She sought out the great teachers of the age, and asked for extra lessons, more than were required, more than were comfortable. She was building, in secret, an entirely different kind of dancer than the one the school knew how to make, and she was building it out of pure refusal to be told what she could not do. She had a way of speaking about those years, later, that tells you everything. She said that from her earliest days she had built castles in the air, out of her hopes and dreams. It sounds like a small thing to say. It is not, because most people build castles in the air, and then let the wind take them, and go on to sensible lives. Anna Pavlova built hers and then spent every waking hour hauling real stone up into the sky to make them stand. The dream was not a comfort she retreated into. It was a set of orders she obeyed, an aching muscle and blistered toe, every single day. Now, among the teachers she found in that school, one man mattered more than all the rest, and his name deserves to be said slowly, Enrico Cecchetti. He was Italian, a small fierce genius of a man, considered the greatest ballet virtuoso alive. And he had developed a method of training so thorough and so demanding that dancers still use it today. Where the school saw a weak girl, Cecchetti saw something else. He saw the odd arch foot and the fragile line not as flaws to be corrected, but as the raw material of a rare and particular beauty, and he took her on, and he drove her hard. Under his eye she began to change, not into the sturdy technician the fashion demanded, but into something the fashion had no name for yet. Her weakness, worked on daily, turned into a kind of unearthly lightness. The very fragility that had made the other children laugh began to look, on stage, like a body that had shed its own weight. She learned to hold a pose so that it seemed the air itself was holding her, and slowly, in the private world of the studio, the whispered verdict of the classroom began to reverse. The broom was becoming something no one could quite look away from. There was another teacher, too, an older gentleman named Pavlova, who watched her push herself and grew worried in the way that only a wise old teacher can. He saw her, one day, trying to copy the flashy acrobatic tricks of a stronger, more celebrated ballerina, whipping herself through spins her delicate frame was never built for, and it upset him. He told her, in words she carried for the rest of her career, to stop. Leave the acrobatics to others, he said. It hurt him to see such strain on her delicate muscles, on that severe arch of her foot. He was not telling her she was weak. He was telling her something far more important, and it took a great teacher to see it. Your daintiness and your fragility, he told her, are your greatest assets. Do not try to win praise by imitating those who are physically stronger than you. Do the kind of dancing that brings out your own rare qualities. It was permission, of a kind, and it was also a map. He was telling the girl who had been mocked for her thin ankles that the thing they had mocked was the very thing that would make her immortal. She listened. She believed him, and she built her whole art on that single truth. So, by the time Anna Pavlova finished her training, she was no longer the pale reject the examiners had turned away. She graduated in 1899. At 18 years old, and she did not graduate quietly. She was chosen to enter the Imperial Ballet, a full rank above the ordinary beginners, skipping the anonymous back rows entirely, and she made her official debut on the very stage she had pointed to as a child, the stage of the Mariinsky, in the blue and gold hall where the whole thing had begun. The promise she had made her tired mother on that cold night 10 years before had, against every reasonable expectation, come true, and the critics noticed her at once. What they saw was not a perfect dancer. By the strict rule book of the day, she broke rules constantly, bending her knees where she should have kept them straight, turning her feet where they should not have turned, placing her arms in ways the manuals forbade. On another dancer, it would have looked like error. On Anna Pavlova, it looked like a return to something older and warmer, the romantic ballet of a vanished age, when dancers were meant to move you rather than merely impress you. The public did not know the rules. They only knew that when this thin girl danced, something in the chest went tight. She said a thing, around this time, that became the truest sentence anyone ever wrote about her. No one can arrive from being talented alone, she said. God gives talent. Work transforms talent into genius. Here's the part that matters. She was not being modest, and she was not being falsely humble. She was describing, with complete accuracy, the actual mechanism of her own life. She had been given a strange and fragile gift, and she had spent every hour she had turning it, by force of will, into something the world had never seen. The genius was real, but she knew exactly where it had come from, and it was not from heaven alone. Now, in those first years at the Imperial Ballet, her life took on a shape she loved. The theater became her whole world, a warm-ordered universe of morning class and afternoon rehearsal, and evening performance, of the smell of rosin dust, and gaslight, and old velvet. She rose quickly through the ranks, from a promising newcomer to a favorite of the old master Petipa himself, who began to revise his great ballets to suit her, carving out variations that showed off exactly the delicate qualities Gert had told her to trust. She was, in the strict hierarchy of the Russian ballet, on her way to the very top, and she had her devotees, a whole crowd of them, young men and women who followed her from performance to performance, and called themselves, proudly, the Pavlovitsi. They waited at the stage door in the Petersburg cold. They argued about her in the cafes. They belonged to her the way people belong to a religion, and she, for her part, gave them what she had, night after night, all the fragile fire she had built out of nothing. For a young woman who had grown up poor and mocked and often ill, it must have been a strange and dizzying warmth to be loved like that by so many strangers. She loved animals, too, all her life, with a tenderness that seemed to have nowhere else to go. Dogs and a Siamese cat, and, above all, birds. In the years to come there would be a house with a pond, and swans upon it. And one swan in particular, a great white bird named Jack, who would sit with her while photographers worked, draped across her lap like something out of the very ballet that made her famous. It is easy, looking back, to make too much of the swans. But the tenderness was real, and it was there long before the fame. In a woman who had been a fragile creature herself, and knew what it was to be delicate in a hard world. But here is where the story turns, and it turns not because something broke, but because something opened. Around this same time, a new kind of artist was rising in the Russian ballet, a young choreographer named Michel Fokine, and Fokine was restless. He looked at the grand old ballets, the endless glittering spectacles Petipa had perfected, and he felt them growing cold and mechanical. He wanted dance that meant something, that carried real feeling, that used the whole body to speak. And when he looked for a dancer who could carry that new kind of meaning, who could make an audience feel rather than merely applaud, his eye fell on a Pavlova. Now, the thing you have to feel here is the quiet of it. There was no announcement, no thunderclap, on the day the most famous solo in the history of dance was born. It came, as the great turning points so often do, out of an ordinary working conversation between two artists who trusted each other. Pavlova had been moved by a poem, Tennyson's lines about a dying swan, and she carried the image to Fokine, and she asked him, simply, to make her a dance. Something small, something for a charity evening. Neither of them, that day, had the faintest idea what they were setting loose upon the world. Fokine sat at the piano and worked out the dance almost as quickly as it takes to tell it, setting in his movements to a slow, aching piece of music by the French composer Saint-Saëns, a short cello melody called simply The Swan, and what they made together was not really about a swan at all. That was the secret at the heart of it, the thing that made it last. The white feathers and the trembling arms were only the surface. Underneath, it was about the one experience every single person in every single audience already knew was coming for them. It was about death, and the fighting against it, and the losing. Picture the shape of the thing. A single dancer, alone in a pool of light, drifts onto the stage, already dying. There are no leaps, no tricks, nothing to make a crowd gasp at physical daring. There is only a body fighting quietly against its own ending, the arms lifting like wings that can no longer bear their owner up, the whole frame trembling with the effort to stay, to live, to rise just once more. And then, at the last, the surrender, the long slow folding down into stillness, the final tremble of a hand, and a silence in the theater so complete you could hear people weeping in the dark. It premiered in December of 1905, at a charity gala to raise money for widows and orphans, and it was over in under 3 minutes. 3 minutes. And in that time something happened that no one in the hall was prepared for. This was not a display of technique. It made almost no technical demands at all. What it demanded instead was that every gesture, every tilt of the head and reach of the arm, carry a whole world of feeling, and Anna Pavlova, the fragile girl who had been told her weakness was her gift, poured her entire self into it. When the light finally died on her still body, the audience did not applaud. For a moment, they could not. And then, of course, they did, and the sound of it followed her for the rest of her days. The Dying Swan became her signature, the thing the whole world would come to know her by, and she would dance it again and again, in country after country, for the rest of her life. But here's the strange and tender fact, underneath all that acclaim, the dance was so simple, so stripped of everything but pure feeling, that it could not be faked, and it could not be inherited. It was hers. It lived in her particular fragile body and the particular way she surrendered, and when that body was gone, the dance as she made it would be gone too. So, by the year 1906, everything the girl in the cheap seats had dreamed of had come true and more. She was named Prima Ballerina of the Imperial Ballet, the very summit, the rank the whole cruel wonderful system existed to produce. She had a devoted public, a signature masterpiece, the favor of the great old choreographer, and the friendship of the great new one. She stood at the top of the most prestigious ballet company on earth, in the golden theater she had pointed to as a child, with the whole of Russia at her feet. By every measure, the world understood, she had already arrived. And this is exactly where the crack begins, so quietly you could almost miss it. Because a strange thing was happening inside the woman who had everything. The warm ordered world of the Imperial Theater, the very security she had fought so hard to reach, was beginning to feel less like a home, and more like a beautiful cage. She had made herself out of refusal, out of the stubborn need to do the thing she was told could not be done. And now that there was nothing left to refuse, now that she had won, a restlessness stirred in her that the Golden Hall could not answer. She began, quietly, to look toward the door. Here's what you have to understand about the cage she was in. The Imperial Ballet was the safest, grandest place a dancer could possibly be. A guaranteed salary, a guaranteed pension, the finest stages, the finest orchestras, the deep protective machinery of the Russian state, all of it built to keep a prima ballerina in comfort and glory to the end of her days. To leave it was almost unthinkable, and beyond its walls lay something even more troubling to a person of her temperament, a whole modern movement in art that was pulling ballet in directions she did not love and could not bring herself to follow. For a new world was being born in the ballet, loud and daring and strange, and its prophet was a man named Sergei Diaghilev, who would soon take Russian dancers to Paris and set the whole of Europe on fire with his ballets russes. Pavlova danced with them, briefly, in those first electric seasons. But her heart was not in the new music, the jagged modern scores, the deliberate breaking of the old beautiful rules. When Diaghilev offered her the lead in a radical new work by a young composer named Stravinsky, a ballet called The Firebird, she read the strange score, and something in her recoiled. And she said no, and so the door she was looking toward did not lead where everyone assumed a great dancer's door should lead. It did not lead deeper into the fashionable avant-garde, into the company that would define modern ballet for the century to come. Pavlova turned away from all of that. What she wanted was something at once humbler and far more audacious, a thing no ballerina of her stature had ever seriously tried. She did not want to be the newest thing in the great capitals. She wanted to take the old, pure, beautiful ballet she loved, and carry it, with her own body. Two people who had never in their lives seen anyone dance at all. Now, to feel how strange that ambition was, you have to understand what the world of ballet looked like then. It lived in a handful of great cities: Petersburg, Moscow, Paris, London. It was an art for the wealthy and the educated, performed in gilded halls for people in evening dress. And the vast rest of the world, the small towns and the far countries, and the ordinary working people everywhere, had simply no access to it at all. It had never occurred to anyone that they should. Ballet went to its audience. The idea that a dancer might go out and find a new one, across oceans, was almost nonsensical, and this is where the true weight of her life begins to gather, in a decision that would give her the whole world, and slowly take her body in exchange. Because to do the thing she dreamed of, Anna Pavlova would have to give up the cage entirely. No state salary, no guaranteed pension, no protective machinery. She would have to form her own company, from nothing, and finance it herself, and haul it across the surface of the earth by ship and by train, year after year, to wherever there were people who might come and watch. It was, one observer said, a very enterprising and daring act. It was also the beginning of the end of her. So, around the year 1910, she did it. She broke free of the Imperial Ballet, left the Golden Theatre and the frozen city and the country of her birth, and set out to build a life on the road. She settled, in time, in London, in a house called Ivy House, with a garden and a pond where she kept her swans. And this house would be the one fixed point, the one still center, of a life that would otherwise almost never stop moving. She would return to it between tours the way a migrating bird returns to a single tree, but she would spend so little of her life inside it, because the tours, once they began, swallowed the years. Picture the sheer physical reality of it, stripped of all the romance. A woman in her 30s, then her 40s, whose body had been fragile since birth, climbing on and off trains in the small hours, sleeping in a different hotel bed night after night after night, unpacking and repacking a costume of hand-sewn feathers in cities whose names she could barely pronounce. She crossed oceans that took weeks to cross. She danced in heat that soaked the stage and cold that stiffened her feet. And she did it not for one glorious season, but for 20 years, almost without rest. The distances alone are hard to hold in the mind. She took ballet to South America, to audiences who had only read of such a thing. She took it across the whole vast width of the United States, coast to coast, again and again, year after year, until a whole American generation turned to dance because of her. She went to Mexico, where they showered her with hats. She went to Japan and China. She went to India, and to Australia, twice. A journey by sea so long it was almost a separate life. There was, by the end, hardly a corner of the inhabited earth where Anna Pavlova had not danced. And here's the thing you have to sit with. In most of those places, she was the very first. The first ballet many of those people had ever seen. The first time a human body had moved that way in front of their eyes, in a town hall in the American Midwest, in a theater in Lima, in a hall in Tokyo. For thousands upon thousands of people scattered across the world, the entire art of ballet arrived once. in the shape of a single small Russian woman, and was never afterward forgotten. She was not just touring, she was carrying the whole art form in her own two hands to the ends of the earth. There is a boy in this part of the story worth pausing on, because he tells you what she was really doing out there, in a municipal theater in Lima, Peru. A 13-year-old boy sat in the audience one night and watched in a Pavlova dance, and something inside him turned over, and never turned back. His name was Frederick Ashton, and he would grow up to become one of the greatest choreographers of the 20th century, and he would say, ever after, that his whole life in dance had begun in that one evening. She was scattering seeds like that across the entire world, and most of them she never saw grow, but the body kept the account. Now, remember what she was made of. This was the child who had been sent to the countryside to breathe, who had caught every fever, whose ankles were so weak her teachers had feared for them. That same fragile frame was now being asked to dance a full demanding program, and then board a train, and then do it again the next night in the next town, for months on end, for decades. The feet that had been mocked as too delicate bled into her shoes. The lungs that had been weak from birth labored in the smoke and dust and cold of 1,000 strange stages. She was spending herself, quite literally, city by city, and she gave herself no mercy about it, none at all. This is the part that aches the most, looking back. She could have slowed down. She had earned, 100 times over, the right to rest, to dance a light season in London, and let the great distances go. Everyone around her could see the toll, but she seemed unable to stop, driven by the same iron thing that had kept her at the Barry in the empty studio, as a mocked and fragile child. The work was not a means to fame she could now enjoy, the work was the thing itself. To stop dancing was, to her, very nearly to stop living. Here's what you have to understand about how she saw it, and she said it herself, plainly, so we do not have to guess. If she could not dance, she said, then she would rather be dead. It is easy to read a line like that, as mere drama, the sort of thing performers say, but in her mouth, it was not drama. It was a simple, accurate report of the arrangements she had made with her own life, long ago, on a sleigh ride home through the Petersburg dark. She had decided, at 8 years old, what she was for, and she had never, not once in all the years since, allowed herself to be anything else. So, the tours went on, and the reviews everywhere said the same astonishing thing, that she seemed to weigh nothing, that she defied gravity. One critic, watching her, wrote of a miraculous, feather-like flight that seemed to break the law that holds us all to the ground. Think of what those words really mean. The audiences could not know it, but the very weightlessness they marveled at was the direct fruit of the fragility she had been mocked for as a child, worked and worked over decades, into something that no longer seemed to belong to the earth at all. Her greatest weakness had become the thing that made her seem more than human, and in among all the grand distances, there were the small human tendernesses that kept her a person, and not a legend. The animals traveled in her heart, even when they could not travel with her. She sat for a formal studio portrait with her favorite swan, the great white bird named Jack, its long neck curved against her. And if you look at that photograph, you see not a diva but a gentle woman with a creature she loves. There were the 15 Russian orphan girls she quietly took in and paid to raise, in a house near Paris, children of the war and the revolution who would otherwise have had nothing. She did not talk much about that charity, the orphans, and the endless benefit performances she gave for causes that would never repay her. It was simply part of who she was, the tenderness of a woman who had herself been a poor and fragile child in a hard country, and who had not forgotten it under all the applause. Picture her, between the trains and the strange hotels, arranging money for children she would rarely see, sending it across borders, worrying over their schooling. The world knew the Dying Swan in the spotlight. Fewer knew the laundress's daughter who could not walk past a suffering child without stopping. But the road never let her rest for long, and the road was beginning to win. As the 1920s wore on and turned toward the 30s, the woman climbing on and off the trains was no longer young. She was in her late 40s now, an age when the body of an ordinary person begins to ask for ease, let alone the body of a dancer who had punished hers nightly since she was 10. The old fragility, never truly gone, was creeping back in around the edges of the great machine of her will. The performances were as luminous as ever, but between them, more and more, she was simply tired, and still she would not stop. There was always another city, another contract, another hall full of people who had never seen ballet, and might never get another chance. Now, you have to understand what that relentlessness cost her, because she hid it well. She kept a schedule that would have broken a healthy woman half her age. She danced when she was unwell. She traveled when she should have rested. The iron resolve that had carried her up out of poverty and mockery, the very thing that had made her great, had no off switch, and it was driving her now straight toward the edge of her own strength. In the winter of what would be her last year, she was moving as she had always moved, from one engagement to the next across the cold heart of Europe. She was traveling from Paris toward the Netherlands, toward The Hague, where she was expected on a stage as she had been expected on 10,000 stages before. But somewhere on that journey, in the raw January cold of the Low Countries, the fragile lungs that had labored since her premature birth finally faltered. She fell ill on the way, and by the time she reached The Hague, she was iller still, and the illness was not the kind that a night's rest would mend. She had caught a chill that settled into her chest and deepened, in a matter of days, into pneumonia, and then into the pleurisy that would kill her. Picture the hotel room in The Hague, the Hotel des Indes, grand and quiet, the winter pressing gray against the windows. She sent all the way to Paris for her own doctor, a man she trusted, and he came. But there was little, in those years before the medicines we now take for granted, that any doctor could do against an infection in the chest of a body, already worn down to almost nothing. Word went out quietly that the great Pavlova was gravely ill, and here we come to the story that has been told about her ever since. The story that people who know nothing else about her still somehow know. As she lay dying, weak beyond lifting her own hand, the doctors are said to have told her she might dance again if she fought, or perhaps that she would never dance again. The accounts differ, and the great fear of her whole life, the one she had named so plainly, was upon her at the last. If she could not dance, she had said, she would rather be dead. Now both halves of that sentence were arriving together, in a hotel bed far from home. What she asked for, in those final hours, tells you everything about who she was, and it is why the world has never forgotten it. She did not ask for a priest, though a priest would come. She did not cry out for her mother, or for Russia, or for the Golden Theater where it had all begun, lying there in the winter dark, at the very edge. Anna Pavlova asked them to get her swan costume ready, the white feathers, the costume of the dying bird she had become 10,000 times for strangers. At the end of her own life, the only death she knew how to face was the one she had been rehearsing since she was young. Sit with that for a moment. For 25 years she had folded herself down into stillness under the spotlight as a swan giving up its life, and every single time, when the music ended, she had risen again and taken her bow and gone on to the next city and the next. Death, for Anna Pavlova, had always been something you performed, and then stood up from. And now, at last, came the one performance there would be no rising from, and her instinct, her deepest instinct, forged over a lifetime, was to meet it, the only way she had ever known how, in costume, ready, as the swan. She died a little after midnight, in the earliest hours of the 23rd of January, in the year 1931, 20 days short of her 50th birthday. Her husband and companion of many years, Victor Dendra, was at her bedside, and her maid, and the doctor who had come all the way from Paris. It was very quiet, the great voice that had spoken to the whole world without ever saying a word. The body that had seemed to weigh nothing and defy the ground, went finally still in a hotel room in a foreign country, in the deep cold of a European winter, with the snow coming down outside on a city that was not her home. They dressed her, afterward, with tenderness. They put her in her favorite dress, a beige lace gown she had loved, and they laid a sprig of lilac in the coffin with her. In the gray early morning a Russian Orthodox priest came and said the old prayers over her body, the prayers of the country she had left behind so long ago, and carried inside her all the same, across every ocean, to the very end. And then the small procession went out into the winter, and the woman who had almost never stopped moving in life was, for the first time in decades, completely still. The news went out across the world she had spent her life crossing, and the world stopped to grieve in a way it rarely does for a single artist. In city after city where she had danced, people who had seen her once, years before, and never forgotten it, felt the loss as something personal. She had been the first ballet of so many lives. She had carried the whole art to so many who would otherwise never have known it existed, and now the small fragile woman who had done all that, who had defied gravity and her own frail body for 50 hard and glorious years, was gone. But here's where the story does the one thing she would have wanted most. It refuses to end in that hotel room. Because on the night she was next scheduled to perform, her company did not cancel the show. They did something far more beautiful, something that came out of an old and sacred tradition of the ballet, and something that says more about what she was than any words could. The theater filled. The audience took their seats in the dark. The orchestra played the music of the Dying Swan, the slow aching melody of Saint Petersburg, and the curtain rose on an empty stage. Imagine it. The house lights down, the music beginning, and no dancer. Instead, a single spotlight, alone, moving slowly across the bare boards, tracing the path she would have danced, holding the empty air where her body should have been. 3 minutes of light and music and absence, while a whole theater full of people wept for a woman most of them had only ever seen from a distance, in costume, pretending to die. The swan was gone. The light danced her final solo alone, and there was not one person in that hall who did not understand exactly what they were seeing. That empty stage is, in a way, the truest portrait of her that exists, truer than any photograph or painted canvas. Because Anna Pavlova had always been, in the deepest sense, a kind of vanishing. Her whole art was made of things that could not be kept, a gesture that lived for an instant and was gone, a weightlessness that existed only while the music played, a death performed so perfectly that it broke your heart. And then as she rose to bow, she spent her life making beauty that could not be held onto, and then she was gone herself, and the empty spotlight told the plainest truth of all. And yet, of course, she was not really gone. Not in the way that matters, and this is the part of her story that keeps growing after her death. Think of that 13-year-old boy in Lima, Frederick Ashton, who had watched her once and been changed forever, and who went on to shape ballet for generations. Multiply him by the thousands. Every place she had ever danced, she had left behind people in whom the seed had taken root. Dancers and dreamers and ordinary children who had seen, just once, that the human body could do that, and who carried it forward into lives she would never know about. She had done, without ever quite announcing it, one of the largest things a single artist has ever done. She had taken an art that lived in a handful of gilded rooms and given it to the world. Before Anna Pavlova, ballet belonged to the few. After her, it belonged, at least in the imagination, to everyone. To the small town in the far country and the poor child in the cheap seats, the way it had once belonged to a laundress's daughter in a cold Petersburg apartment who had been taken, one night, to see the sleeping beauty. She had passed on the exact gift that had made her. So, remember the house in London. Ivy House, the one still point in all that motion, with its garden and its pond. After she was gone, they raised a statue of her there, out in the middle of the water where her living swans had once glided, a small figure caught forever in a moment of weightless grace. And her ashes were placed, in time, in a quiet columbarium in London. Her urn adorned, for years, with a pair of her ballet shoes. The woman who had crossed every ocean came, at the last, to rest in the one city she had chosen for herself, near the pond, near the swans, near the water. There is a small strange honor, too, that tells you how deeply she reached into ordinary life. Far from any theater, in kitchens on the far side of the world, in Australia and New Zealand, there is a dessert people still make for their celebrations, a light thing of meringue and cream and fruit. Pale and airy and delicate, it is called a pavlova. It was named for her, after she danced through those distant countries, because something about its lightness, its seeming weightlessness, made people think of the way she moved. She had become so beloved that they gave her name to sweetness itself, and the name is still spoken, daily, by people who have no idea she was ever real. Now, think about what that means, really, 100 years on. In homes that have never heard of the Mariinsky Theater, or the Imperial Ballet School, on continents she visited only once by ship, her name is still said with affection over a shared table. The fragile child who was told she was too weak, who was called the Broom and the little savage, whose own school did not want her, ended by giving her name to a small joy that outlived everyone who ever saw her dance. That is not the usual shape of fame. Fame fades. But she had planted herself, somehow, into the ordinary happiness of strangers. Here's the part most people forget, though, under all the swans and the statues and the sweetness, it cost her everything. She did not glide through her weightless life, the way the audiences imagined. She hauled it, step by aching step, out of a body that was never meant to bear it, across a world that took 20 years and finally her life to cross. The lightness was real, but it was not free. It was purchased nightly, at the very end on the train and in 1,000 cold theaters, by a woman who had decided as a child what she was for and then paid the full price, without complaint, to the very last breath. And she chose it. That is the thing to hold on to. At the height of her security, safe forever in the Golden Theater, she had looked at the comfortable cage and walked out of it, of her own free will, toward a harder and shorter and infinitely larger life. She could have grown old as a pampered legend in Petersburg. Instead, she chose the trains and the oceans and the town halls at the ends of the earth, chose to spend herself down to nothing so that a boy in Lima and a child in Tokyo might see, just once, what a human body could become. She chose the giving over the keeping. So, what do we do with a life like that? Now, it would be easy to tell it as a tragedy, the fragile woman worn out too young by her own relentless will, dead in a foreign hotel 3 weeks short of 50. And there is truth in that. But it is not the whole truth, and I do not think it is the truth she would have chosen, because she was never trying to live long. She was trying to live fully, to pour every ounce of the strange gift she had been given back out into the world before her time ran out, and by that measure, the only measure she cared about, she succeeded almost beyond belief. Think of the arithmetic of it, the tender, impossible arithmetic. One small fragile body, 20 years of almost ceaseless travel, country after country, ocean after ocean, hall after hall, thousands of performances, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who saw ballet for the first time in their lives in the shape of Anna Pavlova, and never forgot it, and out of all those seeing, an unknowable number of lives turned, quietly, toward beauty, toward dance, toward the sense that the world held more grace in it than they had known. She spent one life. She altered countless others. That was the trade she made, and she made it gladly. And here's what stays with me most, the small human thing, under the vast achievement. It is that costume, waiting in the room in The Hague. She was dying, and she knew it, and everything she had built, the fame and the fortune and the worldwide love, could do nothing for her in that bed. And out of all the things a person might reach for at the end, she reached for the feathers, not out of vanity, out of something much deeper. The swan was not a role she played. By the end it was simply who she was, the truest self she had, and she wanted to die as herself. Picture her mother, so many years before, on that cold night in the great blue and gold hall, watching her sick and dreamy daughter lean forward in the cheap seats and fall in love with something impossible. That woman had almost nothing to give, a laundress bent over other people's linen, scraping together the price of 2 tickets. She could not have known what she was setting in motion, that the frail child beside her would carry that one evening out into the whole world and give it away to millions. But she took her daughter to the ballet, and everything grew from that single act of love. There is a lesson buried in all of it, though she would never have preached it, and I will only set it down gently and let it be. It is that the thing they mock you for may be the very thing you are for. Her weakness became her weightlessness. Her fragility became the quality that made grown men weep in the dark. The examiners turned her away. The children called her names. The rule book said she did it all wrong. And every one of them was looking at the exact source of what would make her immortal. She simply refused to believe them. And she was right. Now, remember the empty stage again, the spotlight tracing her final solo alone. There is something almost unbearably fitting in the fact that the ballet the whole world knew her by was a death, a swan giving up its life. She rehearsed her own ending 10,000 times before she reached it, and when it came, in the hotel bed with the snow outside, she met it not with fear, but with a strange readiness, asking for the costume, wanting to be dressed for the one performance she had been preparing for all along, without ever knowing it, since she was a fragile child dreaming in the cold. And the music helps you understand her, if you let it, that slow aching melody of Saint Saëns that she chose. It is not frightened music. It is not angry music. It is tender and resigned, and somehow full of love, even as the life ebbs out of it. A thing letting go with grace instead of terror. That was how she danced it, night after night, and I think in the end that was how she meant to go. Not fighting and clutching, but folding down slowly, beautifully, into the stillness, the way she had folded down under 1,000 spotlights, trusting the light to carry the rest. Here's a thing worth saying plainly, because it is easy to lose under the legend. She was a real woman, not a symbol. She was tired, and often unwell, and lonely in the way that people who are always moving are lonely. She fussed over her orphan girls and her animals. She could be difficult and exacting, as great artists usually are. She had a favorite lace dress, and a favorite swan, and a house she loved and hardly ever saw. The weightless creature in the spotlight was made by a flesh and blood person who ate and slept and worried and ached. And that, if anything, makes what she did more astonishing, not less. So, when you think of Anna Pavlova now, do not only think of the white feathers and the defying of gravity, though those are true. Think also of the sick child in Ligovo, sent to the country to breathe. Think of the 10-year-old going back each day to the mirror with the cruel names ringing in her ears, refusing to be what they said she was. Think of the empty studio at dusk, the trembling weak ankles, the step done again and again after everyone else had gone home. The swan on the stage was the last and smallest part. The real dance was the whole hard climbing life underneath it. And think of the reach of her, the sheer improbable reach. That a poor girl born in a regimental hospital in a vanished empire, premature and frail and unwanted by her own ballet school, should end by carrying an entire art form to every inhabited continent, by changing the course of dance for 100 years, by leaving her name on statues and streets, and even on a dessert eaten by people who will never know her story. The distance she traveled was not only in ships and trains. It was the distance from that cold apartment to the whole of the human imagination, and she crossed all of it on her own 2 feet. Now, there is one more image I want to leave you with before we close. And it is not the death, and it is not the empty stage. It is earlier, in the middle of her great wandering, in some town whose name is lost, in a hall full of people who had never seen ballet in their lives. The lights go down, the music begins, and out into the light comes this small woman who seems to weigh nothing at all. And for a few minutes an entire room of strangers forgets its hard ordinary life, and sees, perhaps for the only time ever, that a human being can be that beautiful. That is what she did, over and over, for 20 years, in place after place after place. She gave people a few minutes of pure grace, and then packed her feathers and got back on the train. Most of those people she never saw again, most of their names she never knew, but she left something in each of them, a small permanent brightness, a memory they would carry for the rest of their days, and sometimes tell their grandchildren about. I saw Pavlova dance once, and the grandchildren, not quite understanding, would nonetheless feel the in it, and remember the name. The was earned. Here's the truth that all the mockery and all the fragility only makes sharper. Nobody handed her a single thing, not the body, which fought her, not the school, which rejected her twice and then belittled her, not the rule book, which said she was wrong, not the world, which had no idea it wanted what she was bringing until she brought it. She built the whole of it herself, out of refusal and work and an 8-year-old's unbreakable promise, and then she gave it all away. And then she asked, at the end, only for her costume. And so we come back, as we must, to that room in The Hague. But we come back to it now knowing what it means. The feathers laid out and waiting. The great weary heart slowing in the winter dark. It is not, I think, finally a sad image, though there is sorrow in it. It is the image of a person arriving, at last, exactly where a lifetime of choosing had always been leading her. She wanted to be ready to dance. She had wanted that since she was 8 years old on a sleigh in the snow. She wanted it still, with her last clear thought. And there is a kind of triumph in that, not defeat. Because a life is not measured only by its length, whatever the arithmetic says, and hers was not long. It is measured by how fully it was spent, how much of it was given, how much light it threw off before it went out. And by that measure Anna Pavlova lived one of the fullest lives it is possible to imagine. Spent utterly, given away almost entirely, thrown out across the whole surface of the earth in 10,000 3-minute deaths, that left audiences weeping, and dance forever changed. She used up every last thing she had been given. She left nothing on the table. She danced until she could not stand. Now, the swans still glide, in a way, wherever she planted them, in every child who takes a first ballet class, because ballet is simply a thing that exists in the world, a thing available to ordinary people. She is there, though the child will never know her name. She made that possible. She is in the dessert on the holiday table, and the statue over the pond, and the slow cello melody that still, a century on, can silence a room. She scattered herself so widely that she can never quite be gathered up again, and that, for a woman whose whole art was a kind of vanishing, is exactly the right immortality. Here's the part that returns to me, at the very end, like a scent you catch and cannot place. It is the smell of a theater, rosin dust and old velvet and the particular warmth of a great hall filling with people, the smell she must have breathed almost every night of her adult life. In Petersburg and London and Lima and Tokyo, and 100 towns between. Wherever she was in the world, that smell was home, more than any house, more than any country. She lived inside it. And I like to think that even in the hotel room at the end, some part of her could still smell it, and was comforted. And the touch of the feathers. Think of her hands, over all those years, taking up that costume before each performance, the light brush of the sewn plumes against her fingers. A sensation repeated 10,000 times until it was as familiar as her own skin. Of course she asked for it at the end. Of course she did. It was the most known thing in her whole known life, the texture of her truest self. And reaching for it in the dark was not the gesture of a dying diva, but of a soul reaching for the one thing that had never, in all her wandering, failed to be there. So let her have it, in our imagining. Let the feathers be brought and laid within her reach, in the quiet room with the snow outside. Let the woman who spent her life becoming a swan be, at the last, exactly that. It is what she asked for. It is, in the deepest sense, who she had made herself into, across 50 hard and luminous years. Out of a fragile unwanted body, and an impossible childhood dream, the swan came home to die, and she was not afraid, because she had made this journey before, and she knew, better than anyone who ever lived, how beautifully it could be done. Now, in the years since, the feathers have long since gone to dust, and the hotel room has hosted 10,000 other travelers who never knew, and the trains she rode are museum pieces, and the empire she was born in has vanished from the map. Almost everything she touched has passed away. That is what happens. Time takes the costumes and the theaters and the applause and the flowers, all of it. The way the tide takes what is left on the sand. The lace dress, the sprig of lilac, the ballet shoes on the urn that were later stolen. Even the things we keep, we do not get to keep. And yet, walk into Ivy House Garden in London on a still afternoon, and there she is. Out in the middle of the pond where her swans once swam, a small bronze figure caught forever in a moment of rising. One arm lifted, weightless, going up into an air that has held her now for nearly 100 years. The living swans are gone. The woman is gone. But the reaching is still there, fixed in metal, the eternal upward gesture of a body refusing to be bound to the ground. And the water moves gently around her, the way it always did, and something of her stays. Here's what I keep coming back to, in the quiet. She never had children of her own, but she took in 15 orphan girls and gave them a home. And she scattered her true children, the dancers and the dreamers, across every continent on earth. She never had a fixed life, only a house she barely lived in. But she made a home, of a kind, in the shared memory of millions who saw her once and held onto it forever. She had almost nothing at the start, and by every ordinary measure she had spent herself down to almost nothing at the end. And yet look how full her hands were, look how much she left behind. Because the truest thing she left cannot be stolen the way the ballet shoes were stolen, or lost the way the feathers were lost. She left the simple proved fact that a fragile unwanted child can become something the whole world reaches for. She left the knowledge that beauty can be carried, deliberately, to people who have been told it is not for them. She left a lightness, an actual lightness, in the air of the world, that was not there before her, and did not entirely leave when she did. You cannot put that in an urn. It does not gather dust. It simply goes on. So, when the cello plays that slow melody now, somewhere in the world, on some evening, in some hall, and a dancer folds herself down into the stillness as a swan giving up its life, and a Pavlova is in it, not as a ghost, as a gift, passed hand to hand down all the years since 1905, from her fragile body into countless others, the way a flame is passed from candle to candle, and loses nothing in the giving. The dance she could not keep, that lived only in her own vanishing body, turned out to be the one thing she truly kept, because she gave it away completely. And I think, in the end, that is the answer to the sorrow of the hotel room. She did die too young, far from home, worn out by her own giving. That is true, and we do not have to pretend it is not. But she was not robbed. She was not cut off from a life she wanted. She had lived, entirely, the only life she had ever wanted, from the sleigh in the snow to the feathers in the Hague, and she had done with it exactly what she meant to do, which was to spend it, all of it, on beauty and hand what she could not spend to everyone who would take it. So picture her one last time, not dying, but dancing, somewhere in the great middle of her life, in a town whose name we have lost, under a spotlight in a hall full of strangers who will never forget this night. The music rises. The small weightless figure drifts into the light, and for 3 minutes the whole hard world falls away, and there is only grace, only the impossible tender beauty of a body that seems to have forgotten how to fall, and a room full of people leaning forward in the dark, holding their breath, receiving the gift she crossed the whole earth to bring them. That is where I want to leave her, not in the winter hotel with the snow at the window, though we have honored that room and what she asked for there, her last clear wish, spoken so simply, get my swan costume ready, leave her instead in the light, mid-gesture, weightless, alive, giving away the one thing she had made of her whole hard life, in a hall that has long since been torn down, to people who have long since died, in a moment that ended a century ago, and somehow has not ended at all, because we are still, right now, leaning forward in the dark, watching her dance. She would be pleased, I think, to be remembered that way, not as the fragile child who was turned away, though she was that, not as the woman worn out too soon, though she was that too, but as the swan in the light, doing the thing she chose above all others, the thing she would rather have died than lose, right up to the moment she did. The costume was brought, the wish, in its way, was granted, and the small woman who had built castles in the air and then hauled real stone up to make them stand, stood at the last exactly where she had always meant to be, ready to dance. That was the whole of her, from the beginning to the very end. A girl who decided, impossibly, what she was for, and then never once let herself be anything else, and paid the full price of that decision without ever asking for it back. She gave the world an art it did not know it wanted, and she gave herself to that giving completely, and when the end came she asked only to meet it as the thing she had spent her life becoming. There are not many lives that whole, that single, that fully spent. Hers was one of them, and the world is lighter for it still. So the next time you hear that slow sad cello, or see a dancer fold down into stillness under a single light, or even on some far holiday table, see that pale sweet dessert brought out with its name that no one thinks to question, remember the laundress's daughter from the cold Petersburg apartment who was told she was too weak, and who danced anyway, across the whole world, until it killed her, and who asked at the end only for her feathers. Remember Anna Pavlova, and know that the lightness she left in the air of the world is still there, and always will be, waiting for you to lean forward in the dark and see it. If this story moved you the way it has long moved me, I hope you'll stay a while with this channel, where we tell the lives of people worth remembering. If you would, take a moment to subscribe and to like this video, so that more people might find her story and lean forward in the dark themselves. And do turn on notifications, so you won't miss the next life we sit down to tell together. There are so many more of them waiting, ordinary and extraordinary at once, and I would be honored to tell you the next one.